John Huston had a long, varied career as a filmmaker. He composed films of several different genres, from the thrillers to the grandiose dramas, period piece epics, and quirky comedies. And above all, he was a director whose films were always seemingly striving for appreciation from mainstream audiences, with a couple of notable brazen exceptions, and yet were mostly also thoroughly appreciated by the critics interested in auteur theory or in discovering philosophic or political manifestations within mass entertainment. He is a director who pleased a lot of people, and without betraying his own convictions as an assertive artist. Huston's fascinations were broadly American, and even his forays into telling English or Irish stories were marked by an American's imagination of the old world. They do not have the feel of local productions, but rather of reverent American recreation. The Man Who Would Be King is thoroughly Hollywood, or Hollywood's take on Lean, perhaps. And The Dead might not have any Irish viewers assuming it were a local production, not due to the cast, but due to the handling of the events as exalted high literature, as Americans and non-Irish perceive Joyce, not as a local paragon. And then the Kremlin letter feels far more American than European or English or Russian, and if compositionally it resembles the sleekness of European auteurs or vaguely New Hollywood stylings more broadly, it is likely more due to Huston having a hand in shaping the language of many influenced auteurs, and him now being allowed to direct films in a manner that he may have preferred. See the proto-new wave filmic sensibilities evident in The Misfits for a list of Adrian Messenger and Night of the Iguana. John Huston was the quintessential American director, probably excluding John Ford, as it is quite clear the European quasi-classical or Baroque approaches for artists such as Wells and Kubrick, and even the more casual priorities of the later icons such as Spielberg or Scorsese wholly displayed a more internationalist sensibility. Scorsese's well-remembered focusing upon Italian-American concerns announced a more cross-national enthusiasm, even during his earliest features. Also, whilst filmmakers like Altman and Peckinpah could be cited as ardently American, their works are less all-encompassing and more obsessive about cultural particulars, where pathological archetypes are concerned, than they might have liked to be considered. Altman, while having some attempts at international exploration, be it Gosford Park or his Bergman homages of the 70s or that Vincent and Theo escapade, primarily focused on the quirky, self-celebrating, comparatively insular American character, compared with Huston and Ford, especially Ford's, conscious awareness of where America sits in world history. The likes of MASH, Nashville, Buffalo Bill, The Player or Shortcuts expresses a loud pride in American eccentricity, which is, for non-Americans apparently, quite deafening and really unpleasant. Then Peckinpah, the emotional, self-defensive misanthropist visionary. What an exemplary eye for visual storytelling and filmic composition, generally funneled into desiring Americans ought hate themselves, which is a good idea for a certain period, but then improvement becomes more pragmatic. Adventure. Sam Peckinpah attempted to show the brutality of the world on the screen, and he did, bemoaning audiences for enjoying the Wild Bunch's final shootout. He seemed to potentially misunderstand that aestheticization is fundamentally a kind of romanticization or stylization of even an undesirable individual action or event. You can decry the application of such graphic material entirely, or just accept that subject matter has the capacity to be misinterpreted and to develop the mode of cinema in response to it. If violence in a film is enjoyed, it is plainly not the equivalent of that enthused audience desiring violence in their waking existence, though when Peckinpah's films primarily gravitated around Americans committing great violence, it sends a message of either Peckinpah's ambivalence, which, if he were, would be his prerogative as a film director, or his concerted effort to display a cynical, grueling disposition of either America or this world at large. I am aware that Straw Dogs was not set in America, but would never have been made by a British director, and I would actually accept Ballad of Cable Hogue as cultivating an American nihilism, or at least no more than Huston might, it being the most Huston reminiscent of Peckinpah's films, and also of Peckinpah's fetishization of splatter violence ever found a potent, insightful function in a brazenly brave satirical project. It was in the superlative accomplishment Salad Days. I'm very fond of Peckinpah. Although if someone were attempting to be Peckinpah now, I would probably bemoan it. Even if the films are of great technical caliber, even on a par with Peckinpah. That opened floodgates moment for film violence in the 70s was a rich period, and a necessary one, in my own views. Although to continue on in that manner forever would have indicated a counterproductive, unimaginative nihilism that would be too malignantly scornful to prospective, mass liberating, or otherwise progressive, sincerely progressive, undertakings in our world going forth. And so now, on to Judge Roy Bean from John Huston. Paul Newman portrays the kind of character one might have gotten Jeff Bridges to perform in the later decades of his career. Huston presents us with one of his more confident comedies, a film which rather mortified the screenwriter John Milius. He felt the film wasn't fascistic or imperialistic enough, and I'm not being snarkily coy. Milius is rather open about his inane beliefs. And if you don't like comedies all that fervently, if you feel a bit ill at sitting through these American things about American Americans in America, and feel as though that sometimes light-hearted films, while not intrinsically unwanted, are painfully formulaic and emotionally unambitious, you won't consider it one of Huston's best or better films. It certainly isn't one of his worst. Quite far from it, actually. Huston had helmed some unmemorable films, including We Were Strangers from 49, Moulin Rouge from 52, Heaven Knows Mrs. Allison 57, The Barbarian and the Geisha 58. Sinful Davy of 69 is just painful. I didn't finish viewing Prizzi's Honor. I just don't want to watch these caper things. They've always frustrated me from a quite young age. I've never cared for Beat the Devil as much as some have insisted either. Sometimes certain audiences let old movies get away with too much due to their casts and some vague esteem. And sometimes there are fanatics who are desperate to call everything one director helms as genius, therefore Beat the Devil gets mentioned every now and again. I've tried to claim all of De Palma's features as genius, and there are a handful that still just exist to mock me, seemingly. Judge Roy Bean is not a waste of time, I don't believe, though if it is someone's priorities, I can't help but feel as though I'm grateful that that isn't me or my life, honestly. Anyway, hope to see lots of people at the Mahabharata screening in Sydney tonight, and if you can't catch that, do give your time to Gods of Stone tomorrow, Panahi's The Circle on Sunday, or Oshi's Angel's Egg on Monday. Sell those sessions out, they deserve to be seen by as many of the public as it is possible. If I have one last thing to share about the life and times of Judge Roy Bean, it is that Bear is an astonishing actor. He's a champion, and maybe even the most enjoyable factor of the film. Also, the cinematography from the not entirely prolific, though not subpar, Richard Moore is fairly good overall, far from a flat presentation of events. Moore's visuals are generally enticing and vivid, possibly even depicting events as being more entertaining, less banal, more acceptable and even likeable than they possibly otherwise are. Where 70s Houston is concerned, I like Kremlin Letter, Man Who Would Be King, and Wise Blood, and prefer Fat City and Macintosh Man to it, though for a lesser film from a particular decade for Houston, it is a stirring achievement. Most might be very grateful if Judge Roy Bean was their lesser film of a decade of several completed features. Houston began direction on both The Last Run and Love and Bullets, although I wouldn't count those as his works during that decade, really.